Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I return to you back to the quickie for a rather more subjective video about Chris, and that is his art. Now, it should go without saying that this is probably going to be one of the more subjective sides to talking about Chris, because they say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I stand by that. And I feel like a lot of this topic is going to come down to virtually one real question. What do you guys think of it? And I know what my opinions are. I'm very confident in my opinions, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say they are the right opinions. And I think for what it's worth, we need to take that into account for what that's worth when we talk about this. So, let's get to it. My art style, I feel, is one that would be typically mistaken as childlike, yet there is an elegance that gives it simplicity and appealing charm. This is a style that needs not be overthought, as it is typically to the point. Now, let's keep going. Art has been and always will be Chris's selling point. Chris has been involved with some form of art or another throughout his life. He has taken numerous art and design classes in high school, and he holds a degree in computer-aided drafting and design. But despite his extensive education in the visual arts, and relative lack of other discernible skills, his style is quite unique, to say the least. Ever since the very day Jason Kendrick Howe found out about Chris's creation of Sonichu, many people have taken interest in Chris because of his infamously bad artwork. Ironically, his crude creative abilities are what made him stand out as an artist. Sonichu wouldn't be Sonichu without Chris's art, encouraging Chris to produce more of what it remains a popular subject amongst trolls and weens. And what we see right here, Goddess at Work from 2022, showing Chris working on comic pages in his workroom at 14 Branch Lane Court. Presumably these were documents that were sort of recovered post-arrest, because obviously 2022, and he was arrested in 21. And then you see things like My Mind is a Blank, from when Chris was going through something of an existential crisis, culminating from Chris being arrested for harassing a GameStop employee with pepper spray, and, well, Chris seeming to not really comprehend why people would still have an issue with him, despite the fact that he assaulted somebody for no discernible reason. I think the idea is that Chris couldn't work out why people were not listening to him, and Chris thought that violence was the only option, and that violence was somehow not the last bastion of moral cowardice, but that's besides the point. Before we get started with today's critique, and this does sort of describe what I mentioned earlier, but we may as well just do it before we get started. It can be easy to simply write off Chris as a bad artist without asking why, but of course, visual art is subjective. There are a multitude of reasons why someone might not like a particular work, and there are bound to be people who will like it. Different styles suit different artists and viewers, and realism isn't exactly the gold standard of good art. The fact that people commission Chris is proof that he isn't objectively a failed artist. After all, he sold more art than Van Gogh ever did in his lifetime. That almost makes me sad, but never mind. Chris is no naive artist. He took art classes throughout his schooling. He is most likely familiar with the process of artistic critiques in an academic setting. This article will reflect that process. Instead of outright praising or bashing Chris's art, this critique will offer constructive criticism. It will examine strong and weak points of Chris's art in an objective, taste-neutral manner. It will examine all media but place subject emphasis on his most proficient medium, drawing. The article will also consider the context of Chris's art. Finally, it will consider ways of how he has improved his craft, aspects that can be improved, and techniques he is outright unwilling to improve. First up, his weak points. Exercise of skills and improvement in craft. Chris does not seem to consider his artistic skill in need of revision, which that's kind of a bit more evident when you consider his schoolwork outside of art, but we will come to that another day. He is always fully satisfied by the first attempt at a drawing he makes. Naturally, being an artist of that caliber, Chris takes it upon himself to criticize the art that his true and loyal fanbase send to him, and is quick to point out the myriad of flaws in each work. Chris has said that he spends an hour at most drawing a comic page and about a half hour colouring it. He does not seem to be aware of the fact that producing the kind of high quality artwork that fans expect in a good comic strip is very labour intensive and can easily take hours, sometimes days, even with professional software programs like Adobe Photoshop. He also doesn't seem to understand or care that any good artist will draw a scene multiple times before they publish it, especially if there are mistakes. In pretty much any episode of Sonichu, you will be sure to find at least one mistake Chris has made that he refuses to redo and simply colours over. Yes, a lot of the panels in Sonichu can be described as the alpha stage of storyboarding at the very most. One good example is the scene from Chris and Ivy going to a hotel for Hanky Panky. If you look at the scene, you can see multiple mistakes that any artist would have seen as a reason to redo the picture. Chris started to draw his balls, bold statements only when we do these readings, via tracing, but decided he didn't like the proportions that presented, so he decided to keep the start of the trace and just add some speed lines. If you look at the picture of Ivy, you will see that Chris messed up a bit around her face, but decided that instead of redoing it, he'd just colour over it. He also messed up a bit on her right breast. He drew one too small and decided to make it bigger, by just adding another curved line. At times, he would expand Sonichu stories in summary form on Wikipedia, a medium better equipped to keep up with his racing, easily distracted imagination. Everything he says or writes he considers being a part of his comic's continuity, partly because it is easier to record these euphoric and fleeting bouts of inspiration as they occur rather than days, weeks, months, or even years later in comic form. Chris's art has improved in recent years. Compare the original Sonichu issue 0 cover to his later covers. The amount in which he has improved, though, is still up for debate. Choices of materials and technology. Chris believes that his so-called hand-drawn style is superior to art produced by any other means. This is due to Chris's hatred to change, what he has already learned, and his belief as a consequence of his ego, that his method is the best by virtue of being his. Obviously, Chris's skill cannot compensate for the poor materials he uses. He does his work as a disservice by using tools that are the cheapest available: copy paper, Pentel RSVP ballpoint pens, and Crayola washable markers. These happen to be the tools he has used since childhood. Far from archival quality, his art has sometimes shown signs of wrinkling as soon as it has been finished. Chris has defended his practice of rampant text walling as a way to save marker ink. When Chris wants to alter a panel, but does not want to put in the effort to redraw the entire page, his method to fix it is to draw a piece on another page, cut it out, and glue it over the original drawing. This can be seen in revisions to Sonichu issue 15. While Chris has claimed at various times to use Adobe Photoshop to create his characters and edit his comics, he has only ever been seen using Adobe Photo Deluxe, with which he created his slanderous head swap of Clyde's buddy Matt. This is in spite of the fact that Photo Deluxe is intended for scanning and touching up photographs, and Photoshop, which Chris claims to own, would be better suited for the kind of general purpose image editing and head swapping that Chris does. In addition, Photo Deluxe is a fossil of a program that hasn't been supported by Adobe since 2002. Chris's claim in Mailbag number 3 that he uses a past version of Photoshop could imply that he is confusing Photo Deluxe for a part of the Photoshop line, or that, if he really does use Photoshop, the revision he owns is just a woefully out of date as his ancient Photo Deluxe program. You could argue that he never bothered to update the system on his PC, but I'm just gonna go on a limb and say that it's still probably Photo Deluxe that he uses. Chris's font of choice for most of the Solitude comics was Comic Sans, a font almost universally condemned for being overused, childish, unprofessional, and ugly. Serious designers generally only use it as a last resort or for ironic effect, since better hand-drawn fonts are available for purchase. However, starting from Solitude issue 12-9 onward, he switched to Proxima Nova. Drawing techniques. Chris has never learned to hold a pen correctly. Instead of holding the front of the pen with the thumb and forefinger, he draws with his index finger sticking out and bent around the pen. Give this a try and see how long it takes for you to get carpal tunnel. I mean, I suppose the only real thing I could do right here is that... Oh god, how does he, like, how is he doing this, by the way? So, okay, so his middle finger is, like, his index finger is, like, sticking out. He's got up here, and he has it like that. So, where do his, like, his pinky and his other finger go? Do they go like this? I'm not entirely sure, like, how is he... Yeah, he kind of, like, has his... finger sticking up like this, and his and it's like it's because he sticks it out so much. And usually I just sort of, this is how I would just usually do it. I just sandwich it between here, and I hold it in place with my thumb and finger, and just sort of go to work that way. I know there's probably better techniques out there, but unfortunately, well, I'll see if I can zoom in on the image just to give you guys an idea. Yeah, if I'm being honest, yeah, I think it's because look at the amount of space he has when he's grasping hold of his pen. Now, again, in most cases, you would want to have as little space as possible, because imagine how easy it would be for, like, the pen to, like, slide across your barrier, like between, like, in the grip of your fingers. It should be like it needs to be, like, solid, but it needs to be up against here. And if you're gonna have space, you need to make sure it's like it's gonna be secured in such a way that it's gonna be held in tight. It's generally, it's the sort of thing you do if you've ever done handwriting classes, that you learn how to hold pens and pencils properly. You may argue yet again, and I'll say this just before we move on, is that even in this age, ladies and gentlemen, where most people resort to tablets for that sort of thing, but you still have to know how to hold the pen properly as well. So it's neither really... It's not being able to do that. It does cause problems, as you'll see. In Quick Hand Drawing Original, live drawing streams, and over-the-shoulder colouring stream, Chris demonstrated his drawing technique in video. But I suppose just to keep this as brief as possible, we'll actually take a look at the hand-drawn original video. This was uploaded on the 4th of August 2009. In another attempt to prove that he is the true and honest Quick and not the fake, he shows the trolls how he draws Sonichu. Interestingly, in the video's description, Ian says that he wanted to upload the video to Liquid's account, but that he decided otherwise. One would think that the only reason he did this to show Casey, but let's actually get down to the actual crux of the video. This video also gives us a rare glimpse into Chris's drawing techniques. He holds his pen in a bizarre fashion, where he sticks his bent index finger out. His drawing surface of choice isn't even the most basic of smooth surfaces, something that is borderline an essential, but a reflector sketch. A sketching kit from the company Spin Master that includes a tracing reflector as seen in the link presented, was marketed to young beginning artists, not delusional man-children. In a revelation that surprises absolutely no one, even remotely functional eyes, he doesn't waste time in sketching and thinking out the composition prior to drawing anything. The hasty release of Sonichu issue 9 shows that he does some sketches, but he just redraws them in ink. He's clearly not one of the people who believes pencils show where ink should go. Chris appears to enjoy colouring more than getting the character's shape and details right. Apparently, filling paper with flat shades is so tough and takes such an awfully long time that there's just no time to draw details. So, let's, just for what they're worth, we may as well do it, because for aspiring artists out there, this is also one of those cases where it's of some... okay, which one am I trying to find here? I know fine well, like, I'll get to it in a second.
Good evening. But between this and other clips, I would like to present to you a few examples of hand archery. Anyway, let me just, first portion is live, so let me just see if we can get that set up here. Huh, well, you look at that. Anyway, see my hand? See my hand? Okay, let's see how we draw a statue here.
And yes, I agree, ladies and gentlemen, well, possibly, but let's not get away from the fact that I personally would not be wearing any rings on my fingers for doing this. I don't know if this actually makes things any better when drawing, but I've never done it and it doesn't look like a great idea, but what do I know?
As we have been doing the whole time, ever since 2000. First we do this and that. And the ear there. Saturate the things there. Give him a masculine looking chest. I kind of messed up on that one, but oh well. I'll work with it.
Yeah, he'll just work with it.
That's... Little thumbs up there. All that there. The old brown stripes. Give him that there. The old tail. Put his little shoes on. Give him a little lift up the foot. Look there. Put my little C in a circle. And my John Hancock. And let's give him a little drop shadow underneath. Now we break out the markers. Coloring the old mouth with the flesh color. Crayola rocks. Color his arms. His belly. Belly and chest.
No, I've only been watching this for like just less than 3 minutes, and one thing I am also going to add is that even just look, I did not take my eyes away from the way he was holding his pencils or his pens by any point, and I'm still kind of, I could not do that, ladies and gentlemen. I could not draw characters or do an entire comic panels like that. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. 14 bright, Chris boasts about owning, saving marker pen, but are you really trying to tell me that Chris doesn't own something as rudimentary or as basic as a ruler to do any of this? You tell me.
Whatever you want to go, whichever you want to call it. Yeah, it's sticking out. I'll put it back later. Okay, regular yellow. Oh, I forgot the eyebrows. There you go. Look at that. Making him look smart. He's slick. Slick character. Yes. Just hurry up to the coloring.
Not even an editor who is breathing down your neck to get something done would ever encourage you to speed things up like that. But then again, since Chris has never probably been under the cosh of, an editor before, we can assume that, well, Chris had all the time in the world.
Oh, I didn't close the hand. There you go. Could do a little better on this, but no press for time. But it basically definitely looks like, but yeah, it's my style, my handwriting, my hand drawing. It's uncopyable.
That's another thing as well I should point out, is that, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, boasting that it's uncopyable, it would suggest the idea that people would want to copy it. I mean, again, to each his own, but personally I wouldn't, but there you are. I'm trying my best to be as neutral as I can.
Give us little red cheeks.
There you are.
Lime green soulful eyes. Good shade of brown on the old stripes. And the edge in the bottom portion of the tail. The shoes there. Barry blue. Favorite shade? Side shoe sneakers. Funny fine shape will make you do funny things. And we'll accentuate the blackness on the tips of his ears, his nose. And where's that gray? Oh, here it is. Make his sneaker soles shades of gray. Oh, and while I got this up and about, let me make a switcheroo here. Actually, let's do one more thing. Arts and care for Casey. Anyway, now for the old switcheroo. Let's close this up here and put in the hand-drawn pages of book number 0. Let me just re-angle this a bit. The whole history of the hand-drawn. Print these out. You get blank edges. Unedited, as they originally were before I scanned them and typed the text into them. Oh, that's a good page. Very good page. Oh, yeah. But just kind of like the introduction of Excel Saga back in episode 2 of Excel Saga. Sorry, wa Arjunai. I was Arjunai. She did.
Anyway, that's...
Kissy, kissy.
Okay, thank you. I wish I hadn't heard that, but there you are. So, yeah, do you really think that Chris's style is better now, just for this, just for seeing it that way, or what do you guys think? As soon as I can, there we go, found it at last. So, there we are. During 2019, Chris hampered his ability further by wearing his gym gloves while drawing. I don't want to deal with the constant pencil sharpening and all that trash. Chris giving one of his reasons for why he uses a pen for line art. And as you can see down here, yeah, I don't know about you. Like, I was a little bit back and forth about, using, rings on his fingers while drawing, but considering Chris is using, gloves and he's got more rings on his fingers, yeah, this is not good. And considering that he was literally only just tracing a comic that somebody gave to him, is that why Chris, I don't know, could have owned something as rudimentary as a light box to do actual tracing is something I don't get. I mean, I don't condone it whatsoever, but It's a wonder why Chris, even when he had updated equipment, that he decided not to invest or learn how to do things better. While most artists will produce multiple sketches versions of a single drawing, often layered on top of one another, Chris is so confident in his innate artistic ability that his first step in a page of Sonichu is drawing the final line art in pen before colouring it with Crayola markers. If he makes a mistake, he shrugs it off and continues. There is no post-processing beyond adding text to word balloons with Microsoft Paint and Photo Deluxe. Attempts to inform him that digital colouring is more efficient and far less expensive than wasting gallons of marker ink filing in monocolour backgrounds have failed. Visual art and most artistic fundamentals. Sonichu had kind of a kiddie art style, which I guess was your point. I thought you meant it as an avant-garde thing to make a statement like ironically bad, from Jackie. I mean, yeah, things like that, I guess. Before the comics, Chris attempted realism for work in oil pastel, charcoal, and graphite, presumably from art classes in school. The results can be seen in the gallery below. While he did spend some time in high school taking art classes, most professional artists heavily study artistic fundamentals before venturing off into the territory of stylization. Without knowing how things appear in reality, it is difficult to distort properties to an aesthetically pleasing effect. Chris trusts in his abilities, yet lacks proficiency in his most important fundamentals. The overconfidence results in the Sonichu comics looking like they were drawn by a grade schooler. Chris started out with a cartoony style for the comic book, full of techniques consistent with early efforts of drawing by small children. Things changed as Chris got into anime and manga, and sought to emulate them to impress his gal pal at the time, Megan Schroeder. Like many amateur Western artists, he copies only the surface elements of the anime style: big eyes, pentagonal heads, speed lines, emotions. These elements were simply laid over his original style with no adjustment, and did nothing to improve the quality of his work. Chris has no understanding of classical autonomy, proportion in figure drawing, or even basic form. His characters are drawn using simple shapes, coloured in outlines, without any shading ever, and even so, he is unable to keep the shapes consistent to any degree. These shapes rarely have any form at all, leading to characters having a cardboard cutout quality to them. Head-on body with a slightly turned head. Though he lacks the skills to make even decent simple poses, Chris has the balls to attempt foreshortening on occasion with disastrous results. Take a look at this, for example. She's got 3 elbows. I think this is meant to be Sailor Uranus, but I literally wouldn't know. And I'm probably going to have to censor this down here, and if you know, you know. And goodness knows what this finger is supposed to be. Characters have no set proportions, limbs morph, heads change size, and faces become unrecognizable. It's only by the colour scheme that we can guess which character is which. For example, in the opening of Sonichu issue 11, the children tend to noticeably get deformed in a different manner in each panel, despite the fact that they're drawn as just an oval for the head, a rectangle for the body, and smaller ovals for the arms and legs. Okay, thank goodness it's not what I thought it was going to be, but still, it's Chris trying to... Okay, whatever. Even then it looks like he's got 3 elbows again. Just to be sure we know who's who, a job that is taken care of by the artwork in any normal comic, Chris sometimes relies on labeling characters with text and arrows. Beyond his differently coloured eyes and Sonichu medallion, no two Chris's have ever looked alike. Unfortunately, Chris, well, probably fortunately or unfortunately, Chris is not John, the guy who did Ren and Stimpy. You know the one. No two Chris's have ever looked alike or even remotely resembled the actual Chris. The character sizes are also inconsistent, which is strange considering most of the characters appear to be about the same size. In most drawings where Sonichu is carrying Roshu seems to shrink. Finer details of human anatomy have long escaped him. See? Because Chris never draws women with pronounced hips, the results tend to resemble children or men, such as with the character Lovely Weather, with unfortunate implications in either case. Though most people just put this down to poorly drawn art styles and nothing that malicious. At least to my knowledge. Chris also doesn't seem to realize that drawing techniques that work in other media might not work in cartoons. For example, he sometimes draws himself with almond-shaped eyes. While no real person's eyelids are particularly circular like a cartoon character, cartoonists generally reserve non-circular eyes for Asian characters. Despite boasting that his drawings of perspective viewpoints are surpassive due to his training in CAD, Chris constantly fails at perspective, with objects implied to be far away, depicted too large, and this is evident in his many vehicle designs, where the front is usually a direct frontal 90-degree view, regardless of the view angle of other sides. This inability to demonstrate parallel lines renders the car distorted. The lack of any concept of shading only further destroys any semblance of perspective. Legs that are implied to be bent forward at the knee only end up looking shorter. Possibly the worst offender in Chris's constant omission of backgrounds. Most scenes happen only on the white backdrop of the paper. Readers are apparently supposed to infer what the background looks like based on context. And again, this is the sort of thing that would probably only really work in things like Maisie Mouse, but then again, Maisie was intended for a much younger audience, and Maisie can actually have some sophisticated levels of background, mostly because of context, not because they decided, apparently Maisie's meant to be under the sea, so we'll make the background green for whatever reason. Yeah, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, you would have to go right back to the very basics to even understand this, and I'm not even sure if Chris can even put that together. Though we all probably know the reason why. It's because Chris ran out of ways to actually put in a background outside of just photographing places, literally putting them in place, and then Chris drawing a picture, putting it on top, and then going through Photoshop and doing the rest. When you think about it like that, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't really seem like an excuse now why Chris just leaves the backgrounds nothing. Similar to some daily newspaper comic strips, thus simply drawing a wide-angle shot of the scenery as the first, usually transitional panel in a scene would suffice. Combined with his inability to make a proper layout, many action scenes end up becoming a jumble of characters moving around without regards to sequence. The reason he does this is probably the same as the reason why he text wars so often, to save marker ink, meaning he's lazy. Because by that point, what is just stopping Chris from scrapping the idea of a comic and just writing a book instead? The proper use of white space and the conservation of painted space is a key element in East Asian art, but despite his anime obsession, he is unlikely to have heard of this. A related phenomenon is simply drawing characters as floating disembodied heads. The Deus Ex Machina / exposition machine is the biggest victim of this. Once again, Chris couldn't be bothered to draw a full body, thus combining all known forms of marker ink conservation. Some pages are just a bunch of literal talking heads speaking walls of text. Chris owns at least one book about drawing manga, as seen in My Half of a Year, A Whole New World for Casey. The book in itself covers everything to do with portraying couples, including images of couples in bed making love. Whether Chris bought it to better drawing out his delusional fantasies or for more material to mass debate to is not known, but either way the book taught him nothing. Character design. A large portion of the Sonichu cast is clearly derivative of existing characters. In addition to the obvious Sonic the Hedgehog recolors, Chris has lifted designs from any anime, video game, or even Western animation he is fond of, with no regard for visual consistency. Beyond that, he doesn't even bother trying to design better clothing for his characters. Most of them wear stereotypical basic clothing, and Chris himself wears his usual clown shirts and pants. With the sole exception of Meg-chan, every female that shows up in his comics wears high-heeled dress shoes. Even when the source of Chris's plagiarism is readily apparent, these lifts can still add up to less than the sum of their parts. Inspired by the fusion characters of Dragon Ball Z and God of War, Colossal Chan looks more like a hobo than a fusion of Chris and Chris Chan Sonichu, though clearly his own effort to design baby Pokemon, Sonny and Rosie, look more unnerving than adorable. Fan disservice. Oh, here we go. We're getting into fans. Well, if you can even call it that. Clearly, the only real true fan of Sonichu is Chris himself, and we will explain why in a second. I am not a gory artist. Just accept the fan service of panty shots and get over yourselves. Well, that's one way of describing it, I guess. Fan service is a term used to describe something that is meant to tease or please the audience. It can refer to any content seen as an effort to appease the desires of fans. But for the sake of this section, it's used primarily to describe scenes of a sexually titillating nature. Since its discovery by the internet, Chris has inserted increasingly large amounts of fan service into the initial tame Sonichu in an effort to assert the heterosexuality of himself and his characters. The range of fan service in Sonichu includes panty shots, rose chew stripping, camel toe intonations, and even a full sex scene followed by 4 pages of text and diagrams describing Sonichu and Rose Chew's sexual anatomy. You'd rather spend your time trying to describe universal string theory, and you'll probably come away still scratching your head about what on earth you just took in. Not a euphemism, by the way. Due to his lack of artistic faculties, much of Chris's depictions of sexuality are highly unsettling to most readers. Any attempts to add sexy material come across as Chris's own wish fulfillment or self-interest, rather than attempts by Chris to please his audience. While the point of fan service is to hint at sexuality in an otherwise clean work meant for general audiences, Sonichu's sexual content hides nothing and disturbs many. Despite the fact that Chris has always viewed Sonichu as a comic intended for children, Chris tried to justify putting panty shots in a children's comics by saying, "Children will likely be seeing the same things in real life." That's a lie. So mellow out and let them learn a bit, and further educate the children with discussions. Okay, few problems I have this. 1, children will be likely seeing these things in real life. 1, no they shouldn't. And if Chris is referring to, the internet, why, if I was a parent and my kids was looking at that sort of thing on the internet, I would be very, very concerned. I don't really know what on earth Chris was thinking about the implications for saying something like that. Also, so mellow out and let them learn a bit. Learn what? What are you supposed to learn from that? And further educate the children with discussions. Discussions about what? Like, Chris, it's how ironic it is, ladies and gentlemen, that despite being a man-child, Chris doesn't know how to write for children, and doesn't really know that, when you write for children, you cut out things like this from the very moment you pick up your pencil to come up with an idea. Do you think when they were writing Sesame Street, they thought about this? Because, no, they didn't. Because that was in no way what they were going for. Of course they didn't. Do you think in Archie they did? I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I have to. Strong points, yeah, exactly. Strong points about Chris's art. Chris is far from the worst artist ever. There are several strong points to his work that set him apart from other poor artists. Color choices and coordination. Chris does get color coordination. Most of the color schemes he uses in his work look decent. Being Chris, he still fails occasionally, such as with the Wikipedia color scheme. Still, color is one of his few strong points, at least compared to the rest of his art style, as evidenced by most of his websites, custom console skins, and a good chunk of his character designs. Chris's favourite colour appears to be yellow and blue. That colour combination is hard to get wrong, which is why so many cartoon characters, from The Simpsons to SpongeBob, have yellow skin. Chris also appears to be fond of the red, white and blue complement, judging by his trademark polo shirt. Despite excelling in his fundamental field, Chris does struggle with colouring rainbows in the correct order of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet. Dexterity. Despite his awkward pen grip, Chris seems to have a mostly steady hand. His penmanship is neat and legible, and most of his mistakes stem from writing the wrong letter and scribbling/doctoring into the right one. Instead of any kind of actual handwriting disorder, his most recent driver's license signatures appear to be quite flourished and feminine. Many artists with unorthodox hand techniques claim their grips can actually give them more control over the pen, and even trained calligraphers don't always stick to the standard grip that most are taught in kindergarten. Chris never seemed to struggle in the dexterity department, at least as far as art is concerned. He can write and draw more neatly than folks with poor fine motor skills. He doesn't have an issue with other activities requiring dexterity, such as typing or playing video games. The autism papers don't even mention poor fine motor coordination, which is a relatively common but not universal among autistics. Even our own article on Chris's diagnosis doesn't touch his dexterity, only his gross motor skills. For once, Chris's autism isn't the culprit. If Chris actually took his time and learned patience, his line work could be phenomenal. Sadly, we don't have an extra 43 years, and certainly Chris doesn't, to work that out, nor will Chris find the time to improve that. Let's be honest. Reach. Chris has undoubtedly become a pop culture phenomenon. While many other artists who spent decades refining their craft can go their entire lives without selling many paintings, or any at all, looking at medallions alone, Chris has sold more works than that of Frida Kahlo were even produced in her lifetime. Chris's works have even been referenced in master theses, published essays, and other academic media countless times. Judging by artists like Van Gogh or Warhol, God bear knows if Chris's works will end up in a museum sometime after his passing. The fact that people are compelled to look at Chris's work at all speaks volumes. Is art even Sonichu's main failing? Main article writing. Well, I'd say probably Chris's writing is just as bad. At least Chris's art is, at the very, very most, relatively coherent, and there's a strong continuity in terms of his work and in his art, because most of his art, like across issues and across many years, is relatively the same. So I guess points for consistency, I suppose, as well. Unlike Chris's writing, which literally goes to the ends of the earth. Complex drawing is not mandatory for making a good comic. Chris's art style is arguably more complex than the style of Charles Schwartz used for Peanuts. Diary of a Wimpy Kid and XKCD get the job done with simple stick figures. Some artistically challenged cartoonists will even ditch the pen for a nice camera to create a photocomic. These genres might not carry museum quality art, but the cartoonists generally make up for it with clever writing. However, and bear in mind, this could even go for things that are not even the focus, such as Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. The images and the writing in that game in particular may not be the strongest for the series, but it's very distinct, and it's pretty much, there's no other game in the series that does that, so points, I suppose. However, Sonichu doesn't even have that to fall back on. Chris does no preparatory writing or preliminary revisions. His narrative is wholly improvised and shifts regularly. He cannot write clear, succinct dialogue, and he has little regard for visual clarity. He doesn't understand how graphic novels are supposed to work as a narrative through sequential images, and instead presents the series more like a storyboard for a hypothetical television series. As a whole, the series has excessive dialogue, something better suited for a novel or television script. It often uses literal phrases, e.g. cuts grass, as a substitute for visual action and or comic onomatopoeia. Chris divides each volume of Sonichu into episodes, a concept popular in TV land but unheard of in the comic industry. Perhaps Chris isn't interested in art or comics, he's just interested in Sonichu. And making... I mean, yes, that may be true, but the problem is that you still... If your intention is to like put your stuff out there, then you've got to relay what you're trying to say about Sonichu and about his adventures. Because if you don't want to do that, then why not just keep it to yourself and make like a daytime fantasy for yourself? But then again, to be honest, Chris's entire life seems to be one elongated pastime consisting of thoughts of Sonichu. Sad but true. Other peculiarities. In some artwork for the later 2010s, Chris put a small me sign, often with an arrow next to the character or characters, meant to represent him. It is unclear why Chris does this, although the usage correlates with him exploring the concept of alternative realities as a coping mechanism, which is pretty much why it is, and I think it goes without saying that's probably, well, it's there for people who want to see it. It's rather self-explanatory. Chris and digital media. Much like his opinions on alcohol, the LGBT plus community folks, butt play, and the holy hexbox, Chris's thoughts on digital art have evolved from outright bashing to a much more open outlook. During the classic era, in the early 2000s, Chris was somewhat open to the digital arts. He created Sonichu in a high school computer graphics class, and he would brag and boast about his CAD major. Things changed soon after. Chris would often state that using new technology creatively provides an unfair advantage in the service of inferior results, e.g. High Guardian Spice. But repeatedly he has called Aspechu blocky and low resolution, because it was drawn with a tablet. This is most likely because Chris thinks that doing digital art instead of the traditional way makes results comparable to poor Microsoft Paint drawings that are more familiar with him. In one of his phone calls to Alec Benson Leary, Chris said his hand-drawn art had more character, never mind that tablet art is technically hand-drawn art anyway. A change of heart, Chris gets an iPad. Chris began opening up to digital media in the 2010s. In May of 2020, during his phase of role-playing as Sonichu, Chris used his COVID-19 economic impact payment his stimulus check on an iPad, software, and accessories for drawing digital art. He attempted a drawing of Sonichu, and he complained about how hard the software was to use. Will Chris ever switch to digital? On the 14th of July 2021, Chris tagged the Crayola company in a Twitter thread complaining about inconsistencies between similar and same coloured markers. A Twitter user asked Chris if he would switch to digital art, stating, "It might be better for you in the long run." Instead of defending his marker on paper style like usual, he responded favourably. Eventually, likely so. I have been so very busy to totally find my niche with a tablet and stylus pen setup. Sonichu gave my body a conscience to start on the setup with the iPad. But that's a major gonna need more free time to... What do you mean free time, Chris? You don't have a job to go to. Why do you need more free time than what you already have? Whatever. Notably, Chris admitted that digital art takes effort, and he seems willing to make the switch in the future after some practice. Time will tell if he does so now that he has been freed from jail. Not really, from what I can say. Chris's other artistic media. Drawing may be Chris's medium of choice, but he's dabbled in others. 3D media. Chris has produced a line of Sonichu medallions, made out of Crayola, model, magic, and acrylic paints. In September 2014, Chris started selling replicas of his handcrafted medals produced to various qualities. He has made Sonichu amiibo by Frankensteining multiple amiibos together and crudely painting them. Another 3D piece is his Sonic Totem from middle school, which was sold on eBay for $1,500. 3D painting. Chris has long held an interest in using 3D printing technology, although the most he has done with it is by plagiarizing files for printing, then hand paint them. Photography and videography. Video has been... we could do like a large amount of articles of these separately, but for what they're worth, Chris's most frequently produced content, the lack in production quality, is frequently compensated by Chris's emotional theatrics. Animation. Chris at one point tried taking up a new medium in the form of animation. Using the Nintendo DSi program Flipnote Studio, Chris took his drawing to a whole new level. Or at least he could have. His drawing degraded greatly when doing artwork here, mostly due to using the DS's stylus pen. When doing animations, his characters have little fluid movement to them and they seem to jerk and wobble, as if they're characters from Ed, Edd and Eddy or home movies. The best one to tell of this is in his Don't Get Trolled animation. You can tell which parts were animated by Chris and which part was animated by the original author 8-Bit, because Chris's artwork just wobbles in a distorted fashion. Music. Chris is a passionate musician who has self-released 3 albums, all of which feature him tone-deafly singing derivative songs on top of famous musics. Sewing. Chris resorted his classic striped shirt himself before attempting to sell it. As said shirt spent 3 years in a water-filled trash bag and was damaged beyond repairability, it didn't work out that well. Spray painting. On the 3rd of August 2018, Chris tackled shoe customization and spent an hour spray painting a pair of Adidas in Sonichu colors. It's unknown how many years Chris wore those shoes, but let's not think about that. Costume design. Containing his trend of using the cheapest materials possible while incorporating only the vaguest of likeliness, Chris's foray in cosplay is par for the course with his hand-drawn designs. They're poorly made, not thought out, and Chris likely believes they're professional quality, but we will get to those in separate articles. Trust me. Originality and plagiarism. When it comes to originality, Chris has absolutely none. Sonichu is and this is them trying to be neutral about this. Sonichu is a fine blend of Chris's personal life and a wide variety of recognizable copyrighted elements. Just about any existing medium that Chris has ever expressed a fondness for appears in some capacity. Chris has a long history of claiming all credit for fan characters initially acknowledged as being created by others and offered for use in Chris's comics. The first of these were Magaji, Jigglyarmy, and Layla. And the most infamous instance, and the one that Chris defended the most fervently, was Simone LaRoche-Chew. At the same time, Chris once had a policy of threatening non-existent legal action against the creators of any Sonichu fan art he could find, and was worked into a magnificent rage over the Sonichu derivative fan parody Asperchu. As well as, Chris has gone on so far as to take a video, the aforementioned Don't Get Trolled, and alter it to suit his needs. Now granted, there were other videos done using that same video, but where they just altered the stick character or sped up the video in the same vein as a YouTube poop video, Chris completely and utterly altered the video to suit his needs so that a humorous song about trolling is turned into Chris's mouthpiece to destroy freedom of speech to make the internet safer for him. Wow, not only is Chris unoriginal, but the only thing he has to add is saying, only be nice to me. I know this level of narcissism is still prevalent even today, but even back in 2000, well, it's never not really been a part of his identity, to say the least. Art gallery. School art. Seen below is a selection of Chris's public school art assignments, from a slideshow of Chris's homemade DVD. At his high school graduation, Chris expected to be highly recognized for his artistic talent, represented in the body of work. When he was not, he cried. This work was produced under the supervision of a professional art instructor, and the incentive for Chris to give each piece more thought, care, and attention than he now prefers to when creating only for his own satisfaction. Despite this, they're still terrible. Note that some readers may find several of these images inadvertently terrifying. Whatever this is, sculpted in a way that looks like a toilet at first blush. Fox McCloud, his Sonichu totem. I don't know what that is. Is that meant to be like a dream catcher, I think? A plate of, Sonic, I guess. A Cherokee tent, another dream catcher. A koi carp. Really, really lambastedly done. Incomprehensible. Something autism. Oh yeah, this is Aspalonic and Vegaton. Mexican themed Pokemon. If we will get to that. Some stuff, more things about Sonichu, like an ashtray, I think. A guy sitting down on a seat or something like that. Anyway, these are a lot of things that Chris did in high school, but to be honest, it's never confirmed, by the way, how old Chris was when he did some of these stuff, whether he was 16, 18, 8. I honestly have no idea. Anyway, tracing is an art technique where another piece of art, in whole or part, is copied along with its outlines as a means of producing original art claimed as one's own. Tracing is a form of plagiarism. Images traced from existing copyrighted content appear regularly in Sonichu. Chris traces with the Reflector Sketch, a long discontinued toy tracing kit produced by Spin Master. The kit comes with a reflective piece of plastic where an original can be placed to the left, and the reflection is used for tracing an outline. This is why most traced images in Sonichu are mirror images of the original work. Due to their poor quality, consistent in appearance with Sonichu art that is not traced, those traced images often go unnoticed as tracing. The fact that Chris fails even at tracing is a surprise to literally nobody. Alternatively, Chris uses these images as references and simply tries to draw images freehand based on them. This is no worse than directly tracing the outlines, but better explains why his results are so distorted in respect to their references. Chris completely uses a combination of both techniques, as some images look closer to their originals than others, showing an utter lack of skill and originality either way. The coveted art award at his high school graduation would have had a lost crap ton of prestige if it had not been awarded to a theatre like Chris. I mean, well, yeah, it is literally just it's traced, almost done word for word. Yeah. Then of course, well, Rule 34. So if there are some things that are, I'll make sure to get this blocked out. Just putting that out there. Anyway, Rule 34. Chris has no shame. I think that's about all you need to know, and we all knew that. And neither does his artwork. Of his many sexually explicit drawings, the most damning of all of them is She Came for Quick.jpg, which brought an end to the Megan saga and cemented the notion that Chris was an incestuous pedophile. As seen in the gallery, Chris doesn't even copy bad porn to life to save his life, with Rosechew turning into a deformed monstrosity in each panel, all for the sake of the old sex. Especially noticeable is the final picture, which shows off a recurring trend in his pictures. I'm not even saying a lot, from the woman around the outside of the vagina instead of from the inside. And, well, I'm not even going into that. all that. We will be getting into this later on. So, thank goodness I feel like I kind of almost dodged a bullet with that one, eh? So, I suppose for what it's worth, that is the end of Chris and Art, and I don't know what to think really after coming to an end of all this. I suppose when it's all said and done, like I said, I personally think Chris's writing is far worse than his art, but I am also going to be remiss to say that Chris never took the time, despite him having all the time in the world, for someone who hasn't had a job for over 21 years, to learn how to improve his craft, how to get better at what he does, or to even say, you know what, I'm going to put the comic on hiatus for the moment until I learn how to get better at what I do. Chris had the time in the world to do this before he fell into all that amount of trouble, but what on earth am I supposed to say apart from you know that and I know that, and it's no real point in trying to tell Chris this now, because when have you seen anybody really tell Chris as it is? But I'll just hold my hands up now and say that, as they say, is that. So I thank all of you guys for watching, and I'll see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care, and bye-bye for now.